The sound of Kent.
The sound of Kent.
Pat Marsh. BBC.
Radio Kent.
As promised, time now to meet the author Campbell Macpherson, who is here, claiming the second half of our lives is ours for the taking. It's in a brand new book called You, Part 2. Kirsty Young, the broadcaster, has called it a clear-headed, invigorating and inspiring guide to the rest of your life. Let's find out. Campbell, afternoon, how are you?
I'm extremely well. Thank you for having me on.
No, it's good to talk to you. What was the idea? What prompted you to write this book then, Campbell, you and your wife?
Well, the genesis of the book was actually my 55th birthday a few years ago now, when I suddenly woke up and my inbox was inundated with ads for Viagra and for adult Tenement adult nappies, and with pension companies telling me I could now withdraw 25% of my pension pots, wherever they thought that they were. And I thought, hang on a second, I was incensed. I've just got going. I've just worked out what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, what I'm about to do in the next 30 years. And I thought, right, I've got to write that book that Jane and I have been talking about for quite a while. And then I turned to Jane and said, we need to write this together, because it can't just be a man in his 50s talks about not retiring.
Up to this point, what was your background? What are you into?
Right. Well, I'm a change expert, I suppose you would say.
Okay.
So I travel around the world giving talks on change, and I work with a lot of leadership teams on how to lead change, and with employees on how to embrace change. So I've been doing that for decades, either behind the desk or as a consultant, all around the world. And my wife, Jane, is a yoga teacher and yoga therapist. So in writing the book, we worked out we were doing similar things for different people. She helps people change in a far more meaningful manner than I do, or a far more personal manner than I do, and accept change, embrace change, and cope with all sorts of things in their life. So we were doing the same things, and we looked at each other and laughed and thought, right, that's it. There's going to be a lot of the book about change, about yoga, about acceptance. And of course, from my financial services background, we couldn't avoid the subject of money either.
Yes, and retirement as well. Why do you think we're hardwired to fear change?
I think it's in the question. We are hardwired. I think it's a throwback to our evolutionary survival, fight or flight mechanisms. And as I teach in my workshops at Headley Business School and running workshops for clients direct, I talk about how once we start to realize that all change is inevitable, which means we need to accept it, and accepting it can be difficult, but it's the only thing we can do, and that it's always personal, it's always difficult, and more importantly, it's always emotional. So we're hardwired to protect ourselves, and we're hardwired to what we need to do actually is embrace our emotions. So realize that every single change we go through is emotional, and the emotions are okay. Even the negative ones, they're normal. They're a normal part of going through change.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's quite reassuring, isn't it? And I was just thinking, human life expectancy has more than doubled, hasn't it, in the last 120 years? So, even when you, for example, hit 50, you've still got plenty of years ahead of you, haven't you?
Absolutely. And that's what was confounding me when I turned 55 and had all these ads. In fact, we're going to be living, on average, another 35, 40, even more years if we're in the West, and so we've got half of our life to enjoy, to thrive. We've still got ambitions. We've still got things we want to achieve. We're going to be made redundant if we haven't done. We're going to retire, but we're going to start our own businesses. Life is in some sense just beginning, or at least the second half of it is. So that's why we wanted to write a book that is practical, but also we tried to make it motivational as well, but not in a happy clappy, dancing with the fairies sort of way. And this is what we can do to actually accept where we are, understand ourselves, and thrive in the second half, because it's an exciting second half.
Because many of us, we want to live longer, but we also want to live better for longer, don't we?
Yeah, good line. Very good line. It is about living better for longer. So we talk about the things you can do to enhance your your physical and mental health, of which we all know about, eating less and exercising and and not smoking and all the things that we do or don't do or know we should do. But there's also some other things we put in the book, how much laughter actually increases the physical health of the human body as well. I think there was a wonderful survey out of Sweden that said that people who laughed a lot and had a positive attitude to life were living something like 7 years longer. And also were 50% less likely to die of heart disease or even infection. It was remarkable. So there's all sorts of little tips in there along how to live well for longer.
Yeah. And when children leave home, because you know this, we all know this, we've all been through it. There is the hustle and the bustle, and there's always something to do or somewhere to go, and the house feels alive. When they leave home and start their own lives, what sort of impact does that have on the family dynamics?
It's a major impact, as your listeners will know. It's a very emotional time, and those emotions aren't all negative, but it's a very emotional time. But also, it changes the status of either the parents, and suddenly we're not just parents full time. We're parents, but we're also husbands and wives and spouses and partners, and it suddenly changes the way that we look at ourselves and that our identity changes, particularly for a lot of Jane's friends. They were really hit with their identity suddenly changed, and so it makes us review our relationships, and we start to look at each other and think, is this the person we want to spend the next 30, 40 years of our life? And surprisingly, an increasing number of women are turning around and saying, no, I actually want to be, it's not a very high number, but it's increasing. That the 60% of divorces are actually triggered by women in later age, which is fascinating. But it's a time to evaluate and reevaluate and work out who you are, what your status is in your mind, and what you now want to be doing in this next phase. Because when kids leave home, it leaves a hole, and it leaves a hole that we can fill.
And it is a watershed for many couples, isn't it? Yeah. Do you think we need to rethink our attitudes to retirement then, or at least redefine what retirement means?
Well, I was going to call the book the R word, which is a word that we weren't allowed to use around the house. But actually, that was childish. So retirement's good, but it's not for me for many, many years, because I've got so many things that I want to do. So if we could just redefine it as living well and living with vitality in the second half. It doesn't matter if you're working part-time, you're working full-time, you're not working at all. It's about being vital, finding the purpose, finding the meaning, and thriving in this second half. So yes, I think we do need to redefine retirement, because retirement will mean different things to different people. To me, it means I'm going to be running my business for the next 10, 15 years without a problem. For others, they're wonderful. They don't have to work full time, and they can be doing the things that they've always dreamed of doing.
You see, many of us go into the second part of our life, don't we, with concerns about finances and the way things are at the moment. That's bound to be even more acute, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's why there's a whole chapter on money. I don't pretend to be a financial advisor, but I've been in and around financial services for a long time. So it's a few tips from a financial services insider, as I've called one of the sections. And I'm finding this with myself and my colleagues and friends recently, as the recent shock to the stock market back when during COVID, and the shock during this ridiculous invasion of Ukraine. People are actually learning not to panic, because the worst thing you could do when there's a shock in the stock market, as so many people did do in 2008, is sell everything because you think it's all going to hell in a handbasket. And then once the market starts to go up again, it's very hard to get back in, and you end up cementing your losses. So there's quite a few tips, of really simple tips, like keep things simple, diversification, don't panic, which is the one we just talked about. And also, when it comes to investing, don't treat it like gambling. And it's some really simple tips that we cover in the book, and we talk about financial advice and where to get it, or what good looks like, and all of that sort of stuff as well. Because we have to talk about money, because that's the thing on so many people's minds as they get into their 50s and 60s. We've got to be able to afford the lifestyle we want and to be able to go out and grab the lifestyle we want in this exciting second half.
Author Campbell Macpherson is here with us at BBC Radio Kent. We're talking about the new book, You Part 2. How much has the pandemic changed our attitude to life and everything, do you think, Campbell?
Well, I think it's changed a lot. It'll be interesting to see how sustainable or how permanent the change is. I found that so many of the leaders that I was advising and talking to in the early days of the pandemic suddenly realized that anxiety was real. And that sounds a bit silly, but if you're very senior in an organization, you know other people get anxious, but you've never felt it yourself. And suddenly we all felt anxious in spring of 2020. We didn't know what was coming up next. We worried about our loved ones. We worried about our own health to some extent, our finances, our employees. But everyone suddenly became anxious. And I think that was something positive came out of that, in that leaders realized that mental health and real empathy and real empathetic leadership was something that was critical to their own success as a leader, but also as a human. And I think a lot of companies have changed for the better because of that. But on a personal level, we all suddenly stopped. If we had the time and the privilege, we were privileged enough to do it. We stopped and went, what do we want out of our life? What do we want out of our working life? What's important to us? Because suddenly we were hit with a pandemic. Now we're with a war on the outskirts of Europe or within Europe, and it suddenly makes us feel what's important to us. Makes us think about what's important and what do we really want, and and it may not be monetary, financial success. It may not be a wonderful career. What's truly important to us? And I think so many of us have been able to stop and ask that question, which I think has been one of the very few good things to come out of COVID.
And in many cases, the answer has been, families and relationships, hasn't it?
Totally. Good point.
That's the other thing we need to consider, don't we? Not only our own care, but also the care and needs of our parents if they're still with us as we go into part 2 of our lives.
Well, there's a very large section about the navigating the labyrinth of aged care. I've called the section, or Jane and I called the section, our parents aren't getting any older. But what I needed to do was better understand anyway, the aged care in this country. And I compared it to Australia, and I compared it to the US, and compared it to some Scandinavian countries to try and get an idea of what's ahead of us, with our parents, and how can we help them, and what support is available from the government. And it really was a labyrinth, but I hope it's a good introduction to help people get their heads around what is happening in this country, what is available, and what needs to happen, and where they can start.
Okay. It is great to talk to you. There is so much more, but it's all within the pages of the new book, You, Part 2, written by Campbell and Jane Macpherson. It's out now, published by Little Brown, and priced at $14.99. Great to talk to you, Campbell. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Pat. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
BBC Radio Kent at 23 minutes past 3.